Hey folks, welcome to Moonshift Audio. There's a question that I've seen discussed quite a bit over the years, and that is, should you put your EQ before or after your compressor? There's still a fair bit of debate about this, but 99% of the time I work with the same approach, and in this video I'm going to show you why I think this is the right way to do it. In this video I use a vocal to demonstrate, but the same principle applies to most sounds. Let's take a look.
Okay, so here we are in Cubase, and basically what I've got here is the vocal from the pre-chorus of Need to Know, which I recently produced and mixed with Tokyo-based artist Kanoko. He very kindly let me use the material from this in my videos. This is the raw vocal. I have stripped out all of the plugins in my usual vocal chain, so this is literally how it arrived with me.
Daylight, take flight, away from this life.
Kanoko did very kindly tune and comp these vocals for me, and he did a great job with the recording. That's a lovely, clean, pretty well balanced vocal. And one of the first things that I would do with a vocal like that is run it into quite a sort of sharp, quick, attacky compressor. The Blue Stripe 1176 is a great example of one of those compressors, and I really like the UAD version. So you can see I've set the attack to quickest as well as to release. Worth noting, on these compressors, a higher number means a quicker attack or release, which is pretty much the opposite to almost every other compressor. And if I feed that in,
Daylight, take flight, away from this life.
so we're hitting
Daylight,
over 10.
take flight,
Maybe that's a little bit too much. Let's just rein that back slightly.
away from this life. Daylight, take flight, away from this life.
So we're just tickling 10 dBs of gain reduction on the peaks there. And to be fair, the vocal doesn't seem to suffer too much from it. But I want to quickly look at how a corrective EQ can help your compression. So as I mentioned, there is this kind of ongoing question about whether you should EQ before or after compression. And honestly, my answer is both. So if I show you what I'm doing here, with the EQ, I'm literally just rolling off the lows. This isn't a particularly bassy vocal, so everything below 90 on quite a gentle 12 dB an octave filter there. And then I'm scooping out the mud here at 350. So I'll undo these. Let's roll off the low end.
Daylight, take flight, away from this life.
Almost no noticeable change there. If I pull out the mud,
Daylight, take flight, away from this life. Daylight, take flight, away from
and we'll
this
just bypass
life.
that.
Daylight, take flight, away from this life. Daylight, take flight.
You can hear we're just removing some of the kind of boxy, unpleasant frequencies that you often find in the low-mid region of a vocal. If you want to see some more of the kind of common frequencies that you might want to look at when you're mixing a vocal, there's a page on vocals in my EQ cheat sheet that's completely free. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. But where this should get interesting is if we now look at the compressor, because bearing in mind, this was always going to happen, yeah? Like I was going to be rolling off the subs and I was going to be scooping out the mud with that EQ. So look, I'm going to drop this after the compressor. Yeah, so we've been hearing it before, but this is what it sounds like after.
Daylight, take flight. Daylight, take flight.
And without.
Daylight, take flight. Daylight, take flight.
Yeah, so really it's the same effect. We're losing the subs and we're kind of scooping out a lot of that mud. But I'm now going to put this in front of the compressor. So the EQ is going to happen before the signal gets into the compressor. And we can take a look at what's going on with the gain reduction now.
Daylight, take flight, away from this life. Daylight, take flight, away from this life.
So we can see here that gain reduction needle now barely tickles past 7 dBs of reduction. And what that means is the compressor's working less hard, we'll get less compression artifacts, it will sound less compressed. We could probably push into that another 3 dBs.
Daylight, take flight,
Or harder.
Away from this life. Daylight, take flight.
Now, that's a fairly sizable amount of gain reduction. We're really clamping down on that vocal now, but the compressor just doesn't have to work as hard as it would if it was also acting on all of these frequencies, like the mud in particular, that we were always going to be stripping out. What I would then perhaps expect to do is to drop another EQ after the compressor. Now, I might use a Marg EQ, which I'm a big fan of, but for these purposes, I'm just going to drop on another Pro Q3. Now, outside the context of the mix, it's actually quite hard to say what I might want to do with this vocal.
Away from this life.
But a common thing might be
Daylight,
just a little bit of clarity
take
in the
flight.
mid-range there, about 1K.
Away from this life. Daylight, take flight. Away from this life.
And that might not sound particularly flattering at this stage. It's only 2 dBs I'm putting in there. You get that slightly sort of telephonic quality, but in the context of a mix, that 1K region is really, really important. Up in the very, very high end, I guess it's at 30K, which is a bit ridiculous, this shelf, but let's see if we can add some real air onto the vocal.
Daylight, take flight. Away from this life. Daylight, take flight. Away from this life. Daylight, take flight.
That's without the EQ.
Away from this life.
And now with.
Daylight, take flight. Away from this life.
Now, the actual mix for this track is not a super sparkly pop track. It's got a kind of retro vibe going on, so I wouldn't probably be using a super sparkly, airy vocal like that. But this is just to demonstrate how perhaps you might want to do some kind of tone shaping or creative EQ work after the compressor. But the real money in my book is on the corrective EQ, the cuts, removing unwanted frequencies. Do that first.
That's it for this week. Please do like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, resources and downloads from me at Moonshift Audio. Till next time.